Hello everybody and welcome back to ChäoS. So I'm recording these two parts back to back. I just went ahead and went through the my comments history and found the comment in question from the person who informed me about the updated fan patches and translation and whatnot for ChäoS here, and they mentioned in there that they had no issues saving and loading in chapters 6 and 7. I don't recall 6 having issues. I'm pretty sure it was just 7 that had issues, but I might be misremembering. That was years ago when I did that series back then. And I think I might have mentioned it in one of the earlier parts as something I'd potentially have to deal with further on in the series. Of course, the series never got to that point. We have been playing blind for a while now. I'm going to take their word for it that there are no issues with chapters 6 and 7. Obviously, there was no issue with 6 because we just played through 6. We're now on 7. If I do end up having an issue, however, I might end up needing to do a live stream series just to push us through this entire chapter potentially. But we'll see. I'm going to hope that there is no issues because I don't exactly have plans to do a one-off live stream. But like I said, we'll see. It just entirely depends on how this all functions. So let me go to get my timer started and we can go ahead and begin. Though it would soon be midnight, the turnstiles of the subway's Hanzoman line were packed with people. The earthquake had led to enormous disruptions in the schedules of all forms of public transportation, and everyone passing through the turnstiles wore looks of unconcealed irritation. I'm a little surprised that the subway is running, considering there was an earthquake, but sure. Watching them from the corner of his eyes, Banyasuji checked the monitor in the station attendant's office. There had been a report from an attendant yesterday morning. When they first heard word that a high school girl was menacing someone with a colossal bladed object, the jurisdictional officers came running. By the time they arrived, however, neither the high school girl nor the man she had allegedly assaulted were anywhere to be seen. Upon hearing of the case by happenstance today, Ban got himself interested in the male victim's description. It nagged at him that several similar incidents had also occurred, which is why he had come here of his own accord at a time like this. It would seem that the altercation had been filmed in all its detail by the security cameras. When he requested that the station attendant let him see the tape, the response was a pleasant yes, but it came along with a warning. It's a tad creepy. For the time being, he made the tape play back on the monitor. The picture was full of noise. It was probably due to the earthquake. He figured it had something to do with all that talk about how data on computers' hard disks had disappeared here and there. Yeah. That's not quite how video files work, but I don't care enough to try and explain it, honestly. In this right here, I just do not care enough, so I'm just not gonna bother. But that's not quite how video files work. You either have the video file or you don't, is basically how it works. You're realistically not going to have parts of the video file get corrupted after it's recorded like that. I mean, you can have, obviously, video files can get corruptions, but generally speaking, after you recorded it, they're generally set to go. If there's corruption in it, it's because it didn't record it properly. Determining who had been caught on tape would be a trial, given that it was barely at the level where you could see what was going on. Yes, this is a game from 2008, set, I believe, in 2006 or 7. The CCTV footage or technology wasn't quite there for, nice, beautiful 1080p, high res, 60 plus FPS recordings, and probably not color, generally speaking, often just black and white. These are clearly color, though, somewhat surprisingly. A lone man appeared in the center of the picture. He stood still in the background, near the wall along the right edge of the screen. Located a short ways away from the turnstiles, it was a place one wouldn't set foot in on the way to board or change trains. In fact, the other passengers only cut across the very front of the screen. The awful noise made it difficult to discern the man's appearance, but he was rather skinny and short. He wore a large rucksack on his back. Van couldn't figure out what he was doing there. Oh, these is those robot things, isn't it? Although I thought they were generally fairly heavy set. Maybe I'm misremembering. After he fast-forwarded through about an hour of tape, a small change abruptly took place. Several of the commuters who had been cutting across the screen walked up to the man and halted. To Ban, it almost appeared as though they were being pulled in by the man with the rucksack. The mysterious part was how they showed no particular sign of starting a conversation with him. They stood in place and zoned out. Nor did the several people who had halted appear to be acquainted with each other. They were different genders and ages, with no common ground between them. What in the world was going on? When Ban gazed at the monitor, cocking his head, a single girl entered the screen. Oh, this is gonna be, God, what's her name? Senna, right? I want to say that's her name. A long-haired high school girl in a Suimei Academy uniform, she headed straight for the man with a rucksack, with the exact gait that came to mind when one thought of someone striding. Her movements were clearly different from those of the people who had stopped earlier. As a matter of fact, she pushed aside the loiterers and suddenly hauled the man up by his collar. For some time, the two of them quarreled, or rather, it appeared more as if the girl was one-sidedly threatening him. Acting as though this had recalled them to themselves, the people who had stopped there set off on their respective ways. At last, the girl flung the man aside. Retreating one step away from the man who had fallen on his bottom, she struck an odd pose. She leaned forward, lowered her center of gravity, and placed both hands together close to the side of her hip. She appeared to be carrying something, but her hands were empty. The report had stated that she was swinging around a large bladed weapon, but where could she possibly be hiding such a thing? The answer soon became evident. Without warning, the camera shook. This wasn't a form of noise. The way the hair and clothing of passing commuters fluttered made it clear that the camera doing the recording was actually shaking. Aban's eyes ate into the screen. Before he knew it, the girl had come to be holding a gigantic sword, one longer than she was tall, though who knew where she had drawn it from. He rewound the tape and confirmed it one more time. No matter how he looked at it, it seemed that the sword had come floating up out of empty space. At least, the girl had kept her center of gravity low and stayed in place without budging an inch. The people captured in the monitor saw the sword the girl had materialized and burst into a commotion, but she took no heed of others' eyes. The rucksack-bearing man, on the other hand, was blatantly terrified. He desperately scrambled up and tried to run away, but the girl wouldn't permit it. And chasing the man with finely honed movements, she swung that enormous sword with ease. Like a fierce gale, the sword sliced apart the rucksack he was wearing. The force of the impact made him topple over. However, it didn't look like he'd been hurt. And in relativity, the officer who came running to examine the scene after receiving a report about it had found not a single remnant of blood. As if she had heard his mutter, though it was a recorded tape, so she couldn't have, the girl suddenly turned toward the camera. The screen went slightly jumbled. The girl's form disappeared instantaneously, almost as if she had never been there from the start. But the man's slashed rucksack remained behind as an undeniable mark of her presence. Though the visual noise made it hard to decipher, it was certain that she had vanished from the screen in less than a full second. Van rewound the film again. There was nothing unnatural looking about the timestamp displayed at the lower right-hand side of the screen. In other words, this tape, it hadn't been edited. If so, how was one supposed to explain away that girl and her sword? Feeling as though he'd seen a ghost or something, Ban was left alone with his perplexity. And our way back to what was going on with us. In the midst of a perfect whiteness, I lay down. I felt soft, fluffy sensation I felt a soft, fluffy sensation of floating, but I didn't know whether or not I was levitating. I didn't have any sense of up or down, right or left. The silence was noisy in my ears. It was like hundreds of crickets were crying out in my head all at once. I wouldn't have experienced any doubts if someone told me this was the world that came after death, for it was so monotonous, simple, tranquil, regulated, orderly, empty, and peaceful. Maybe this is what it felt like inside the mind of a Buddha who had achieved enlightenment. It was vastly different from being in my head. I wanted to stay here forever. The aggravation, bitterness, and hollowness of reality. I didn't want to taste such things. Just as I thought this to myself, noise started flying into the white and previously soundless world. It was the sound of a door opening and someone's footsteps. They were drawing closer. I'm assuming this is a memory of Nanami when she was younger, because the voice definitely sounds much more childish. And I'm going to assume that we were probably much closer with our sister when she was younger. It's just a case of, something happened later on in life and we sort of grew apart. Did you hand it yourself? Would be my question. Because, again, I'm assuming she's maybe in like elementary school. So, maybe 6, 7 years old. Just a guess based off the like sort of rough tone of the voice. Yeah, she's claiming to knit it, but I'm a little bit surprised if, again, somebody who's like in middle school, or excuse me, not middle school, elementary school, knows how to knit, and especially is capable of knitting a full-on knitted cap. I find that very hard to believe. Considering that a hospital food looks, well, the hospital food often is puree. Yeah, no thanks. If someone's hand slid around behind my back and they forced my body up. There, for the first time, I noticed that my eyes were closed. A little girl was there when I opened my eyes. She was Nanami, my little sister. But she seemed awfully small. She was Nanami from a long time ago. How long ago was this? At least it must have been around when we were in elementary school. Okay, so we're only a handful of years apart. So at the very least, in elementary school there was crossover between us. We both attended the same school. Maybe potentially attended the same middle school as well. Or, junior high, whatever you want to call it, depending upon culture. Okay. I didn't realize we were that close in age, though, I'll be honest. I really thought there was a bit more of a gap. But then again, I'm just making the assumption regarding the middle school part. At the very least, I can see that, overlap of elementary, sure, I can see that. We might have been in our last year and she was in her first type thing. Okay, I can see that. The young Nanami dipped a plastic spoon into the curry and held it out toward me. I hit her spoon-holding hand. I went on to inexplicably fling away the tray the curry rested on, slamming it to the floor with my arm.
に、お行儀悪いんだ。お母さんに言いつけてやるぞ。
Nanami crouched to pick the hurled tray off the floor, then brought a dish rag from the sink to the corner of the room and began cleaning.
世話が焼けるな。ナナがいないと何にもできないんだから。
Considering you tried to feed us and we literally tossed the spoon filled with curry out of your hand and then proceeded to take the plate, bowl, whatever it was of curry and toss it on the ground. Or, well, you know, flip it over so it makes a mess. I don't think the coddling thing is necessarily working. Stop it already. I covered my face with both my hands and slowly closed my eyes.
ごめんね。あなたを守ってあげられなくて。
Well, now that was interesting. When I gradually opened my eyes, I saw a white ceiling. Dazzling white. I blinked my eyelids multiple times. I tried moving my fingers. I tried raising my hand over my head. My palm created a shadow. It was what finally released me from the brightness. I'd seen a dream about Nanami. Nanami had been the reliable sort even back then. When I stopped speaking to anyone after the bus accident during my elementary school years, that tendency of Nanami's grew more pronounced. Unlike my parents, who simply became overprotected, she took care of all kinds of things for me, even while being verbally hard on me. But that dream... Had I been hospitalized? I'd commuted there for checkups, but... Well, it was a dream, so there wasn't much meaning in seriously pondering minor discrepancies. I lay back on the bed. It was a white pipe frame bed, white sheets, white pillow, a white linoleum floor, white walls, white fluorescent lights in the ceiling, white curtains covering the window, small white sleeves beside the bed, small white shelves beside the bed, a white pitcher set atop them, white paper cups. I steadily grew sick of it. I raised my torso with all my might. For a second, a numb pain shot through my waist, but it soon diminished. The room was fairly spacious, at least 2 times bigger than my base, but that didn't change the fact that it was so Spartan. Perhaps it was a hospital room. A pair of green slippers had been lined up close by the bed. It relieved me to find color other than white. Yes, I am actually shocked that they're not white slippers. I could move my body, so it seemed that I hadn't died. My throat was dry. I wanted to drink Coke, cold Coke with lots of carbonation. But there was nothing of the sort in this pure white room, and I had no choice except to pour water from the pitcher directly into my mouth. Because apparently we're not going to use the frickin' cups. It was a little lukewarm, but still more than sufficient to wet my throat. As I took a breather for my drink, the door opened, and a white-garbed nurse came in. I then understood that this was a hospital after all. Might have been, hey, for all you know, it could be somebody really taking the roleplay thing seriously. Her eyes went a bit round when she saw me. Apparently she thought I would be sleeping.
あら。西條さん、目が覚めたんですね。
She soon gave me a gentle smile. She was a model nurse. Speaking of which, I had a hunch that I'd seen her somewhere before. Ah, right, she was the lady who's been in the hospital, who had been in the hospital when Dr. Takashina examined me. What had her name been again? I couldn't remember, so I took a furtive look at the name tag on her chest. It said Hazuki. Yeah, Hazuki.
お体の調子はどうですか?
Hazuki held a thermometer out to me. The gesture came naturally to her. I just sort of ended up taking it.
体温を測ってくださいね。
If you speak to me that kindly, I'm not going to be able to do anything but meekly obey. My head was full of question marks, but for the time being, I stuck the thermometer in my armpit. Immediately after, memories erupted inside my head. I remembered those events. Oh, back on the roof type. Roof type. Back on the rooftop. At the time, I'd given up on saving Nanami, and I'd seized at the wheelchair-riding Shogun. But I didn't feel anything there, and what I found myself holding when I toppled over was a Darth Spider helmet. Count Darth Spider. Jesus, really? Count Darth Spider. Okay. The archetypal villain who appeared in the movie Spark Wars. His black suave silhouette was famous even in Japan. But I had such a hard time thinking of Shogun as being a Darth Spider cosplayer that it sent my wrath flying away, leaving me totally at sea. I got up and looked at the wheelchair. No one was sitting in it. A black hood was draped across the backrest. It too was part of the Darth Spider costume. I went on to survey the area, but no one was there. I was the only person who had been on that pitch black roof. The press corps came dashing up there simultaneously. They packed in around me without leaving a single gap, pointing microphones and spotlights at me. Well over 10 lights and microphones. Their excessive vigor almost terrified me. I wanted to flee, but I couldn't budge an inch. They mobbed me.
Nishijo-kun, 投資はどうなっちゃったのかな？
結局ニュージェネの犯人は誰なのかわからないということですか？
そのダース・スパイダーのヘルメットは何か超能力と関係あるのかな？
日常さん、答えてくれませんか？これで終わりなんて言うなら電波ジャックですよ。
結局何がしたかったんです？ニュージェネに便乗した売名行為ですか？不謹慎だと思わないんですか？
ユーリ・ブライトマンさんとは最近話したから？どんなこと話した？
I don't know who the hell Yuri Brightman is.
地震とニュージェネについて何か関係あると思いますか？
その手に持っている美少女フィギュアは何らかの儀式的なアイテムと考えていいんですか？
このような行動を取ったことにはアニメやゲームの影響はあったのかな？
日常さん、
西条さん、
西条君。
The lights aimed at me were incredibly hot. It felt much like getting my skin burnt by the midsummer sun. The media people flooding in made it stuffy and my head went blank. A field of sight swirled around and around. Being driven into a corner, panicking, it hurt to breathe. I cradled my head. I couldn't see anything. I didn't want to see anything. I couldn't hear anything. I didn't want to hear anything. I didn't feel anything. I didn't want to feel anything.
やめてくれ！
At the same time that I shouted, my consciousness cut off as though it had been short-circuited. Oh hey, an ambulance arrived. Yes, I'd lost consciousness. And then, afterward, how did I end up in this hospital? I couldn't remember. At least, I didn't think I'd come here on my own 2 feet. Maybe I'd been carried over by an ambulance. Hazuki was writing something down on the clipboard she carried. It must have been holding paper or something. Was she writing about my condition? I confirmed the time by peering at the plain-looking watch on her wrist. After 6 a.m., I must have slept for quite a while. Did you really have to sleep for quite a while? Did you really have to sleep for quite a while? Because, you know, it was, what, 9? When we were supposed to be meeting with Shogun? And we were probably up there for half an hour to an hour, potentially. I'm just gonna spitball here. So it was probably around 10 or so when we lost consciousness. I don't know if I'd say that was for quite a while. You know, ambulance probably took a decent amount of time to arrive and a decent amount of time to get us to the hospital. So we'll say, especially because, you know, still dealing with all the damage from the earthquake, probably another hour. So we probably didn't get here till maybe about 11 p.m., I want to say. And they probably had a bunch of other shit they had to do before they actually finally put us in this bed. So maybe another hour. Even so, why had I been taken to this hospital? And we did green last time, so I guess we're gonna do red. Hazuki being here meant this was the hospital I usually went to. There certainly wasn't anything strange about them bringing me to a general hospital. But something about it didn't quite fit together. The question of why has Azuki come to check on me nagged at me. After all, Hazuki was a psychiatric nurse. If she had come to look in on me, didn't that mean this room was part of the psychiatric ward as well? I think that's a safe bet considering everything is so damn white.
警察の人が後でお話を聞きたいそうですよ。
Hazuki's gentle tone of voice turned chilly. Without looking at me, Hazuki continued speaking flatly while writing something on the paper held in her clipboard.
妹さんを殺すなんて、ひどい人ですね。
Oh shit. What was she saying?
あなたの家で見つかったそうですよ。死体。
What?
妹さんの手首を切り落として持ち歩いていたなんて、まともじゃないわ。
Oh shit, these delusions.
僕は殺してない。
そう主張しているらしいですね。意味不明なことばかり言ってて話にならないって刑事さんがぼやいてました。
And that's why they brought us to a psychiatric ward.
心神喪失で無罪っていうのを狙ってるんですか？
I'm gonna be real, I think our character is a little bit past temporary insanity.
でもみんな思ってますよ。あなたが殺したんだって。
My heart contracted sharply, and I had the hallucination that my sight went dark. I became unsure of myself. I killed Nanami, you say? It's a lie.
人殺し。
Azuki's hand went still when she stopped writing. She deliberately held her clipboard out to me. Oh. Well, thank you. That was a... That didn't even give us the normal transition to a delusion. You know, we normally get this, like, hieroglyphic type thing, you know, shots of various symbols and shit. We didn't actually get that time, which is interesting. When I came back to myself with a gasp, I was on the same bed in the same room. The sheets I'd kicked off earlier were, for some reason, covering me again. Hazuki, who should have been standing right next to the bed, had vanished at some point. With the cold sweat seeping out of my forehead, I looked around the hospital room once again. Hazuki entered along with a knock, and her eyes went a little round when she saw me.
あら。西條さん、目が覚めたんですね。
She gave me a gentle smile. Paralyzed, I averted my eyes from her.
お体の調子はどうですか？
Hazuki held a thermometer out to me. The gesture came naturally to her. I just sort of ended up taking it.
体温を測ってくださいね。
I gulped as I accepted the thermometer. It was the same. We were repeating the same thing as before. Hazuki acted like she'd entered the room for the first time. I tentatively felt at my armpit. I'd stuck a thermometer in there just a second ago. Despite that, gone. The thermometer had disappeared, which meant it had been a delusion after all. The tension in my body unwound, but I couldn't fully fall into a feeling of relief.
昨日ご家族がお見えになっていたんですけど。
Well, that's a very different line of dialogue, because family was not mentioned at all in our delusion.
西條さんの意識が戻らないので、日付が変わる頃にお帰りになりました。
I would probably phrase that, but since your consciousness hadn't returned, they went home around midnight instead of wasn't returning. Wasn't returning sounds a little bit off in this scenario. Maybe it's just me. You know, wasn't returning seems to indicate that it, to me at least, sort of reads as it wasn't going to return. But that wasn't the case. It was it hadn't yet returned, and thus it would make more sense, again, in my opinion, to say hadn't returned. Past tense instead of whatever wasn't returning would be.
今日は診察時間が始まる頃にお母様が来るそうですよ。
Lacking the energy to answer, I nodded at her. Mom, I must be the most disgraceful son in Japan, no, in the whole world. I've been broadcast on live TV of all things. My moment of shame had aired throughout the nation of Japan. I had definitely been uploaded to YouTube too. I had no clue why I'd been set up as a miracle Esper boy. On top of that, it was abnormal for them to do a live broadcast of my every little move on the day of such an enormous earthquake. I could only assume that everyone really did have their minds controlled by Shogun. In any case, I'd been publicly disgraced. This wasn't something mild enough to stop at an online lynching. Would I be able to live uneventfully from now on? Suddenly, Nanami's face rose at the back of my mind. I bit my lip and clenched at my knees. Even so, if I had been able to help Nanami, none of it would have been a problem. I wouldn't have minded even if everyone in the world laughed mockingly at me, saying, "What a pathetic guy," for the rest of my life. But I hadn't even been able to save Nanami. Great big tears poured out of me.
どうしました？どこか痛みます？
I'm gonna say this, I'm half expecting to find out that Nanami was not dead. And that she did not die, Shogun did not kill her. Like, when we fast forward to our family showing up, I'm fully expecting her to be there, and we'll get this big reveal, dramatic crying and everything about Nanami's alive, I thought she was dead, and things like that. I'm fully expecting that to happen. I went on weeping as I shook my head over and over. Of course, we'll see if I'm proved wrong, but that's what I'm expecting. Nanami was dead. Nanami would never come back. It was my fault. My fault, my fault, my fault. Because I was useless. Nanami had died. Coaxed by Seira's, rather my weak heart's words, I've been in a rush to give up on my opportunity. I'd been in a rush to give up on obtaining my D-sword. I'd viewed myself as a poor little victim. I'd chosen to stay alive, even at the cost of sacrificing Nanami. I loathed my no-good self from the bottom of my heart. If back then, if only I had tried only a little harder. Even though it had been my own decision to give up, I looked back when everything was already done with and regretted my actions. It was the absolute worst thing about me. Thoughts wouldn't save anyone. Even so, I couldn't help thinking along these lines. I'd try a little harder if only I could rewind time and go back. Although, if I actually did go back there, I'd surely make the same excuses and give up again. I'm always like that. I truly was beyond helping.
Nanami. ごめん。Nanami.
Hazuki rubbed my back as though to soothe me. I was a hopeless guy through and through. I was even giving an unrelated nurse a hard time. But my tears wouldn't do me the favor of stopping.
何か後悔していることがあるんですね。でもきっと妹さんも許してくれますよ。
How did she know Nanami was my little sister? Besides, I didn't need such time-worn words of comfort. Sorry, Hazuki, but it's not like another person is going to understand what I feel like. I truly detested and felt ashamed of myself, always being spoiled by others, only thinking of myself. A person like me ought to die. Maybe I should seriously give death a try.
昨日もしきりに西条さんのことを心配していましたよ。とても可愛らしい妹さんですね。
What are you saying?
ナナミは妹は死にました。
Abducted by Shogun with her arm cut off, confined somewhere. In the end, she had probably died alone. My heart seemed about to tear asunder when I imagined it.
そうなんですか？ごめんなさい。勘違いしてしまって。
Yeah, she ain't dead. Until now, I'd always thought Nanami was obnoxious, but when you got down to it, we were siblings who'd been raised together for 16 years. Okay, so Nanami would be 16, and we are again at least a couple years older, because she doesn't attend the high school we're at. So she'd be in middle school. So, there's at least a 1 or 2 year gap between us. I want to go with 2 years. Let's be real here. I'm assuming we didn't like pop out one baby and then immediately get to work on getting another one going type thing. So I'm going to go and say it's like a roughly 2 year gap between us. She always fretted over me while calling me an idiot and stupid head. She'd been loud and persistent because she was constantly attempting to bring me out of my life of dissipation. Yeah, that's a weird word. Especially one that I don't see very often. When she brought provisions from home, instead of just chucking them at me, she invariably tried to eat together with me. Usually a girl of her age would totally ignore a creepy otaku brother like me. Nanami spoke ill of me, but she spoke to me all the same. She'd listen to what I had to say as well. Even at school, far from avoiding me, she'd come up to me of her own accord. Even with an otaku freak and virgin like me, Nanami always saw me as her only big brother. And an individual human being. Her existence had been a huge source of support for me, though it was too late to realize it now.
だとしたら、鬼ってどういう意味なのかしら。
Eh? Not quite comprehending what she'd said, I raised my head. The blurriness of tears made it hard to see Hazuki's expression. What did she say just now?
眠ってる西條さんを、鬼と何度も呼んでいたから、その印象が強くて。
A person who calls me that? There's only one.
それ、本当ですか?
I unthinkingly sprang out of bed and pressed in on Hazuki.
はい、何がです?
妹ナナミがここに来てたんですか?
いえ、はっきりお名前を聞いたわけでは。
Well, describe her then.
僕のこと鬼って呼んでたんですね.
Literally just describe her then. Ask for a description if you didn't get the name.
ええ。
ナナミは今どこに?
Why? We very quickly gave up on confirming that this is in fact who we think it's supposed to be. Because it would make so much more sense to be like, okay, well, if you didn't get the name, then describe what she looked like to me.
ですから、昨日はお帰りになりましたけど、西條さんのお母様と一緒に。
怪我とかしてませんでしたか?
はい。いえ、特には。
Just a wounded heart. For thinking her brother was going to die or some shit.
元気だったんですね。ナナミは元気だったんですね。
はい。いえ、ナナミさんかどうかはわかりませんけど、昨日いらしていた女の子は元気そうでしたよ。
Again, we can identify if it's Nanami by just simply asking for a description of the girl in question. Technically, we don't know that bit. Nanami was alive. Again, technically, we don't know that bit. As far as I could tell from Hazuki's words, there was no mistaking it. Stupefied, I sat back down on my bed. Jesus Christ, our character. How on earth? Even though Shogun said he wouldn't give Nanami back unless I cleared the quest, surely he hadn't sympathized with us and released her. Or had Nanami escaped on her own under her own power? But then how was I supposed to explain the hand that had gotten sent to me? According to Hazuki, Nanami hadn't been injured at all.
もしかしたら君の家に送ったあの手首は別人のものかもしれないよ.
Which is technically true. Those words hadn't been a lie. I'd been dancing on the palm of Shogun's hand. He'd only been deceiving me. No, at this point I didn't care a bit about getting deceived.
そっか.
I see. So that's how it was. That's how it was. Nanami had never been kidnapped from the start. While I desperately tried to grasp onto my D sword at O front, Nanami must have been lazing around at home reading manga, We're going to karaoke with our friends and showcasing her shitty singing voice. I think we broke. Despite the fact that I was crying, laughter bubbled up inside me.
西条さん
Asuki thinks we've cracked.
将軍にまんまと騙された。なんという壮大な釣りだよ。
Nane was alive. She was alive. I could see that goddamn impotent face of hers again. I could see her yappy, annoying, I could hear her yappy, annoying voice. You don't see a voice. The thought of it filled my whole heart with relief, and joy surged through me. My tears wouldn't stop, but these weren't the tears of frustration I'd wept previously. Also, I can just barely make it out, but Hazuki's hair looks short in the picture used on her ID. I've never really noticed it before. It's something I just noticed now. I mean, it's possible that, you know, the braided hair is actually hidden behind her in that when they went to do and take the photo, and that's why we don't like see it at all anywhere. Although then again, it is very much a headshot, even well above the shoulders. I mean, maybe the shoulders are there a little. It's a little hard to tell because it's, you know, it's white on white there. But I don't know what the hell. I just noticed this. I don't know why the hell I felt the need to bring it up. It's just something I noticed. I was a useless guy beyond all salvation. Yesterday too, I'd given up on trying to do something about it with my own strength. But even so, as long as Nanami were alive, I wouldn't seek anything else. Like I'd care if the rest of my world, if the rest of the world mocked me with its laughter. I was truly glad. I get the feeling we're gonna find out that none of that stuff basically happened last night. Or at least as far as the world is concerned, none of it ever happened. We just happened to be on the roof somewhere and we collapsed. Somebody found us and we were taken to the hospital. Maybe we weren't even found on the roof. Maybe we were found somewhere else. Okay, and that, I don't know if I actually read that line about I was truly glad. On the off chance I did it, I was truly glad. So, let's go ahead and save. And that is going to be it for this part. We are now in Chapter 7, which, as mentioned previously, was a bugged chapter back in the day, and maybe isn't now with the newest versions of the fan patch that I'm running right now. May not actually be like the absolute newest nowadays, but as of when I installed it, it was new and apparently fixed the issue. Maybe, maybe not. I don't know. We'll figure it out. You know, if I'm not able to load the save when I go to record this in 2 weeks, we know what the issue was. Or we know that the issue wasn't fixed, but I'm assuming that's not going to be the case. Like I said, I'm going to be taking the comment that somebody made on a episode of the original run-through of this series that I did. They made the comment 2 years ago. I'm going to take it at face value and assume that they're telling the truth when they said that they did not have any issues saving and loading in chapters 6 and 7. But yeah, so that's going to be it for this part. A quick reminder that I do have a Discord. I do highly recommend to join that if you want to know what's going on with the channel, because that is my go-to place for posting about anything going on with the channel, whether there are changes that need to be made to my recording or streaming schedule, or just, you know, general interruptions because of computer difficulty or holidays, you know, interfering with the ability, or well, not really interfering with the ability, but, you know, just not being the best of times to go ahead and record or live stream. So yes, that's going to be it for this part. Like I said, I will see you all next time. Oh, also, down there in the description, you'll also find a link to my Patreon and a Streamlabs donation link, as mentioned previously. Patreon takes a 5% cut, but if you go that route, you get goodies such as early access to videos. If you go the Streamlabs route, the channel, however, takes 100% or damn near 100% of whatever it is that you decide to give. But because I don't have a nice way of automating authentication of monthly donations, if you decide to go that route via Streamlabs, that's a feature they added a number of months back. Like I said before in the last part, I think it might have been September or August when they added it. Don't quote me on that though. But I think it was about that time. But like I said, I don't have a good way of automating the authentication of those and being able to provide those goodies, so I don't. So yes, as of right now, at least Streamlabs is just the, I don't care about getting goodies, I just really want to maximize support for the channel. Those are options. But if you care about getting the goodies like early access to videos, then the Patreon is there as an option. But like I said, they take 5% of whatever it is that you give. So yeah. But I will see you all next time. Until then, goodbye and farewell.